Welcome to the Upstate Interview Series. I'm Luke Perry. Today, my guest is Dustin Czarny, Election Commissioner from Onondaga County on the Democratic side. Welcome, Dustin.
Thank you very much for having me, Luke. I'm pleasure to be here.
Today, we wanted to get into your expertise in electoral administration generally, and as someone who's followed the NY-22 race closely over the last several months. So to get us started, could you please tell us a little bit about the responsibilities of being an election commissioner and some of the challenges that you face in that position?
So, the elections commissioner is responsible for everything regarding elections in their county, from nuts to bolts. That goes from people getting on the ballot to voters registering for the election, as well as the administration of the election themselves and the database management of the entire, voter registration population of your county year long. A lot of people say, well, when I got this job, they say, well, it's great. You only have to work 1 or 2 days a year, but that's not true. Elections are a year-long thing. We have village elections, primary elections, school board elections, though that we don't run, but we help support. And of course, then the big election in November. And throughout that, you have ballot access periods for all of those elections as well.
And what do you think some of the hardest parts of the job are?
Well, the
That maybe
biggest,
people don't appreciate or know.
yeah, well, I mean, the biggest challenge that boards of elections, especially over the last few years, have faced is a tremendous resource problem as we've expanded our role to accommodate all of the electoral reforms that have come our way. And the other part of the problem is that it's not a job that has a unique job description. You don't know what you're going to expect. You have to be able to uh, evaluate what you've done in the past, change it, and anticipate problems in the future. And sometimes that works, and sometimes you're working in the moment to fix things.
And 2020 was a remarkable year for electoral reforms, given what transpired with the pandemic. Can you share a little bit about the ups and downs of having your experience trying to implement these reforms?
So yeah, I mean, not just 2020, but 2019 as well. In 2019, we implemented early voting and electronic poll books. These are sea change events for New York elections. And that was done pretty quickly, we thought. And then 2020 came and made us change everything that we did about elections because the pandemic created many different challenges, not just keeping our board staff safe and the public safe while providing voting, but amplifying and expanding vote by mail and absentees in the middle of a pandemic with less resources and no real model to base it on from before, in the middle of the highest turnout election that we've seen in a generation. So it was a perfect storm to create a lot of issues, and it did.
And do you think it would be safe to say now that some of these procedures you mentioned, like vote by mail, have been experienced for a primary and a general, that from an electoral administration perspective, things get easier moving forward, or is that not how it necessarily works?
It could, but I do expect that the legislature will make some radical changes to how we deal with vote by mail, and they should, to protect the voters and and simplify the process for counting these absentees, either doing it before election day or have a standardized way of doing it after election day. And if that's the case, then we're going to look at another year of change, but hopefully not at the last minute, and hopefully with some funding that comes along with it.
Then the state legislature started work on some of these very things, I know, throughout this year so far. Let's turn a little bit to NY-22 and particularly Oneida County. And you've been someone following the vote counting process and court case in NY-22 and providing your analysis and media service. And I was wondering if you could start by, as you see it, framing out what the biggest problems were in regards to that process.
So I categorize the problems that happen in New York 22 into 3 different categories. The first category are mistakes that are made in every election that were just amplified because of the close scrutiny that is done. mistakes that are usually corrected, and in New York 22's case, corrected as well. The found ballots in Chautauqua, the database error in Herkimer. These are things that happen all the time and are meant to be double checked through our post-election certification. And so, while these things got media play, these are things that happen all the time. And our Board of Election System are there to find these mistakes and fix them, which is what happened there. The second mistakes are mistakes that are made because of the amplified amount of vote by mail absentees, and the challenges that went along with it. That would be like Sticky Gate and the thing that happened in Madison County where the spreadsheet didn't quite match up, and the writing of the objections onto the envelopes that the judge noted. These are cases where the law has not caught up with the process and with the need to resolve these. And these 8 counties were kind of left to fend for themselves. And many of them came up with ways to try to resolve it. Most of them got it done right by the end of the day. But they were 8 different processes, 8 different timelines, and that created some problems. And the legislature should look to fix that either by counting absentees before election day and reducing the challenge process, or coming up with a standardized way of dealing with the post-election, probably both, really. And then the third category is Oneida County. And the two main, and that's a case of the commissioners there not following the law and not following the procedures that were in place. And I don't believe that this is something that is typical. In fact, I believe it's very atypical of how boards of elections operate throughout the United States, throughout New York State. And one of the reasons that I believe it's atypical is that we have a bipartisan elections boards that we're supposed to watch each other to make sure these types of mistakes don't happen. And I'm talking mainly about the 2 major issues that they had: the failure to register 2,400 DMV registrations that came in in due course and in time to be registered for the general election, and of course the failure to let everybody know about that, and the failure to do the universal transfer law, the portable registration that allowed affidavit ballots that people move from outside the county can do an affidavit ballot inside the county. Those resulted in around, I believe, 1,800 different ballots being rejected initially that should have been counted. Eventually, the court caught up with it and they were counted. But as we know, especially with the registration issue, we don't know how many people walked away from the polling place thinking they weren't registered and didn't do an affidavit ballot. That's something that we'll never know. And I believe the Oneida County Board should be held accountable for that.
Thank you. And the county executive in Oneida County has already requested that the governor release these people, these 2 commissioners, of their duties. And I think it's widely expected that they're either going to resign, or one way or another that's going to happen. I'd like to pick up on a couple of the themes that you mentioned. And the first is trying to parse what was typical from what was surprising or not typical. And I understand exactly what you're saying from a practical perspective in terms of how the system works in different phases, found ballots and that kind of stuff. At the same time, as I know you're familiar with, publicly, the reaction to finding ballots here, finding ballots there, tends not to be a favorable one. So what would you say directly to people who look at that, even with your well-reasoned position, and just kind of scratch their head?
Yeah, so first thing that we have to remember is that elections are made up by humans. Humans make mistakes. And especially when we're talking about on election day, when we have thousands upon thousands of inspectors that only operate 1 or 2 days a year. They truly do only operate 1 or 2 days a year. Yes, they have training, but they make mistakes. And so the post-election certification process is designed to find those mistakes and rectify them. That's why when we release results on election night, they're unofficial results. We have procedures and routines in place to go and check and make sure that we've counted every ballot that has been recorded in. We have ballot accountability procedures that know how many ballots were issued, how many ballots were scanned in the machine, how many leftover blank ballots, those kind of things, how many envelopes are missing. These are the kind of things that help guide us to an error that may have been made, and then we go and try to rectify that error by investigating it and trying to find out. For example, I'll give an example of what I know in Onondaga County. We had a very closely watched absentee ballot counting process. It was uh, scrutinized with lawyers and everything like that. Yet at the end of the day, out of 59,000 ballots, before we certified, we found 8 or 9 absentee ballots that were part of our cure process that were in the ballot room that just never quite made it to the table. Now, at that point, the margins had gone so far to one side or another, it didn't matter, in the end of the count. Of course, with the Tenny Bernese race, every ballot mattered. So, these are the kinds of things that are there, and the system is designed to find mistakes. Anything that doesn't find mistakes is actually a problem because mistakes are going to happen when you're dealing with 59,000 absentee ballots, a quarter of our population, when we're normally dealing with 3% of our population of ballots. That's what the system is designed to do.
Thank you. And you also mentioned earlier the structure of election commissioners, where in New York State, each county has a Republican election commissioner and a Democratic election commissioner. And this has received some scrutiny in Oneida County in particular, because it's not much of the secret that both election commissioners in Oneida County do not work very well together. There's distrust, problems in terms of doing what they're supposed to be doing, as you said, keeping an eye on one another. And this has raised some questions about whether this last vestige of patronage is still something that's beneficial and worthwhile when we think of a relatively technocratic undertaking that is electoral administration. So what are your thoughts on the extent to which this dynamic is problematic? Is this more unique to Oneida County in terms of the tension between the commissioners, that not a productive tension, a counterproductive tension?
Yeah, I do believe it is unique to Oneida County in New York. I'm not going to say that no elections boards have had issues like that, never to that extreme, and never to that incompetency that seems to have been brought about because of that. Um, a lot of people have mentioned that maybe we should get rid of the bipartisan board of elections, and I'm going to push back on that because there are two other models that the United States has: elected representatives that deal with the electoral process. That's the county clerks, and those have their own amounts of tension in them because of the whims of the public. And needing to curry favor with the public, there would be some tension to rule certain ways on certain things, establish either easier to vote mechanisms or harder to vote mechanisms, depending on the party that is in charge. And then, of course, the nonpartisan board of elections administration sounds great. But in practice, these nonpartisan boards of elections have to be chosen by somebody. And they're usually chosen by elected officials and then subject to their whims and whether they're replaced or not. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I think the bipartisan board of election system works best because of that tension and because campaigns know that they can go to one side or the other and get the information they need without worry that is being withheld in some way, and that the public has should have a right to be able to do that as well. And I think for the most part, these bipartisan boards make sure that we can put ideology aside and serve the needs of the voters. That's how it's supposed to work. Like with any form of government agency, sometimes something gets broken and a mistake is made that is unjustifiable. And I think that's what's happened in Oneida County.
So in a place like Oneida County, just following up on that, where it's been challenging over the last several years to find commissioners who are a good fit for the position. You talk to party chairs and they'll tell you that when a good fit is found, unfortunately, that individual tends to move on after a cycle or two for other professional opportunities. So your point's taken about procedurally how things work as you see it in a bipartisan model. What would you say about the nomination process itself? Right now, as I mentioned, it's people are nominated by county party chairs typically, and a rather tight process in Oneida County, that is, and then approved by the county legislature. How can people feel confident that this process regularly produces highly qualified applicants with knowledge of law, management, communication, and all the types of skills, as you know, will be necessary to be effective in this position?
So I do think that we have to remember that there is no school for boards of elections. Elections is not a a cottage industry that is going to regularly churn out professionals that are uniquely qualified for elections to fill the 62 different county boards that we have for commissioners or even for staff. So you are looking for skill sets, and you are looking for the ability to learn on the job and grow. My question for Oneida, and I don't know their inner working of their budget scenarios, but I do know as I'm the Democratic caucus chair for the entire state association. And I know that the Oneida County commissioners were never able to go to our bi-yearly trainings that we have in the winter and in the summer because it wasn't in their budget. And this is a issue that we see with a lot of boards of elections is that the budgetary problems from the county legislature um, is growing because we're kind of the bastard stepchildren of the county government because they don't control our hiring. They don't control us as commissioners. And, they don't see this as a necessary function of government or a vital function of government enough to be able to fund it in the right way. And there's wide disparities from county to county on how the budget is. So you do need to, and I do think, quite frankly, the issues that are going on in Oneida are going to resolve itself because I think there's going to be some more attention paid in the selection process by the county parties because this is a black eye for them as well. But I hope that we will also take a look at the budgetary issues because what you said about when you identify a good person who is committed to the job, they often leave, and they often leave because of stress. We see this nationwide happening right now in the wake of this last election. And they also leave because they're underfunded and they're expected to do more with less. And many times that can't get done. So a good person can make more money in the private sector for the most part and have ability to do more in their job. So we need to fix the budgetary issues and we need to fix the antiquated laws that set us up to fail. That has to be done by the New York State Legislature. And if they don't do it, you're going to see issues like this in the future, no matter who is in charge.
Thank you. So pulling this all together, you've mentioned several things that you think the New York State Legislature could do, and thinking specifically about the issues in Oneida County, locally, who do you think should do what? The county executive, the county legislature, county party chairs? What would you recommend to fix or proceed, assuming again that both election commissioners step aside or are removed? How do we go about fixing these structural problems so something like this doesn't happen again?
So the training and travel budgets that allow for the training of elections commissioners on a bipartisan basis and their deputies needs to be in every budget statewide. That has to be something that is understood by the county executives and the county legislatures that this is necessary and needs to happen. I know in my own county, my training and travel budget was taken out this last year. So I'm still going to go, but I'm going to do it out of my own pocket. You're not going to find a lot of people that are necessarily going to do that. Also, we need to have state minimums for how many full-time voters are dedicated to the Board of Elections based on your voter population. And that is something that is a bipartisan recommendation from our association to the legislature. My personal recommendation would be 2 full-time voters, or I'm sorry, 2 full-time workers for every 20,000 registered voters, plus full-time commissioners that will resolve a lot of these issues. Some of these issues that happen in some of these smaller counties because they have part-time commissioners. The commissioner job is not a part-time job anymore. You need people that are focused year-round and year-long because the political calendar goes from January to January. There's no downtime anymore. And finally, a 4-year term for commissioners to allow them to learn and do the job before they have to run for re-election, because we do have to run for re-election inside our parties. And I know people think of these as backroom deals, but in Onondaga County, I have 600 party members. It's like a village election. If if a new commissioner comes in and they don't have a full 4-year cycle and learning each and every different election, because each and every year is different, then I don't think you can really determine the merit of the people. And I guess finally, there just has to be a better emphasis placed on this office and what we do, not just by the Board of Elections commissioners, but by everyone, and realize that this is a valuable office that cannot be just have salaries cut, they can't have budgets cut, and they can't have the whims of the county legislatures done. And then and again, we have mechanisms in election law that says that we have to spend what we have to spend to do an election. But that often means going over budget, and then they can take your salary. If you Google what happened to me in Onondaga County this year, you can see that sometimes vindictiveness that comes from the partisan county legislature, is a result of that, even though we were under budget. So there needs to be more emphasis in election law about the minimum standards for budgeting, how budgets are determined, and I also believe a job description and a mission statement for Board of Elections commissioners is important.
Commissioner Dustin Czarny, thank you so much for your time and your insights. Thank you for watching. For more, go to ucpublicaffairs.com.